I really think it's now the proper time to talk about the family and how we have been together for the last almost 62 years this June. My wife Elaine and I were married in 1962. I was a senior in college at the time, and I accepted a job with Mobil Oil Company in Paulsboro, New Jersey, working in the refinery. We basically had a beautiful, beautiful apartment on Evergreen Avenue. And in reality, after we had made a trip to Maryland to visit our friends, Howie and Lenny Friedman, we came back and decided that we saw their little baby Lisa. It's time for us to have our first child. So Elaine became pregnant in 1963, 64. And in June of 1964, she basically was ready to go into the hospital. She was really, really nervous. It was Woodbury Hospital at the time, no air conditioning, and it's 97 degrees outside. They didn't have any room, so they put her bed in in the hallway, believe it or not. At that time in the afternoon, my mother called me up and she heard in my voice and she said, "What's going on?" I said, "Elaine is now in the hospital and she's ready to give birth." She said, "Well, we're on our way down. I promise you that." And about 3, 4 hours later, I was thinking, where are they? And as it turned out, we didn't have cell phones at the time. But when they finally got to the hospital, they had my mother-in-law, Sarah, my mother, and my father, who was driving. They basically ran out of gasoline on the way down and had a refill, and it took them a little bit of extra time to get there. My mother-in-law looked me straight in the face and said, "How could you have allowed my daughter to be in a hospital like this?" And I said, "You know what? I've been here about 30 hours already and I am exhausted. So I think I'm going to go home and get some sleep." My father, who was there, said, "You know what? I'll come with you." Anyway, the phone rang about 4 in the morning and my father answered it. And they said, "Hello, is this Mr. Allen?" And he says, "It sure is." He says, "Well, congratulations, Mr. Allen. You have a little girl that was just born and she's healthy." Well, my mother and mother-in-law were on the other end of that conversation. So I guess I was the last one to hear in my family that my daughter was born in June 12th, 1964. We then, from the apartment, we moved to a brand new apartment in Belmore, and it had a pool and everything. And Bonnie was getting a little older. We used to go horseback riding on Sundays. There was a place right across the street. And lo and behold, we came because of my success at Mobil Oil. We were able to purchase our first house in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And that is where Robin was born in 1967, July 15th. The difference is something happened and Mobil Oil decided to ask me if I would go up to New York, get a promotion 3 times my salary that I was making at Mobil Oil. But I was involved heavily in computers at the time that were just starting. So they asked me if I would become the first computer applications manager in New York City and basically go around from refineries and be able to teach all of the engineers how to use our linear programming and how to get it run every night because we didn't have computers in every refinery. So It was a matter of getting it up and having a timeshare in our New York office with all our IBM computers there. And it was somewhat very, very nice. I enjoyed most of it except for one thing, and it was a major, major thing. All of a sudden, I went from 15 minutes from my kids to an hour and a half each way on the Long Island Railroad. We were able to purchase a house in Smithtown, Long Island, mainly because Elaine's sister Maddie and Kip were basically going to be living out in that area in Suffolk County. So we were able to get, I'll never forget it, it's a house, a 4-bedroom house, 2 stories, that literally was $30,000 at the time. My cousin Jay handled all of the restrictions for it, the legalities about it. And we were really happy, except in 1970, being up in New York, a good friend of mine who started at Mobil Oil at the same time I did, and he went to Ferndale, Washington, and we were both Jewish. He basically sent me a magazine, Time magazine, and he said, you got to go to page 69 or whatever it was at that time and read that article. Well, this was just a very similar thing that's happening right now. Boats that were coming through the Suez Canal or the Red Sea, bringing oil directly to the United States, all of a sudden were being, counted on. They wanted to make sure no goods of Israeli origin could be traced to those ships. And that is what the article in Time magazine said. It was a letter to the chandlers of each of the Mobil Oil ships not to take on any goods of Israeli origin. Well, for me, that was a little too much for me to accept. And I immediately, after reading the article, went right down to the 3rd floor, asked to talk to the CEO of Mobil Oil, Rolly Warner Jr., and the secretary said, well, you can't talk with him, but why not go in and talk to his assistant, Herman Schmertz? I will never forget the name. An hour of him trying to convince me that if we didn't take off Israeli goods and they saw that, when they got on a boat, they'd blow up the boat. I'd say, then why not us protect it? How could we go against the state of Israel? All of a sudden, I was put on a training assignment. My boss, I was second away from a vice president at the time, calls me into his office and said, Bob, what did you do? And I said, you know what? I found out that Herman Schmertz was telling me that the shareholder is much more important than the employee. For that reason, I am now going to become a shareholder. And with that, let me stop and change. So my uncle, Artie, and my whole family had moved out here. When I was traveling for Mobil Oil, I went to the Torrance refinery. I was working on a major project with them when we had to cease it because the government said there will be no more funds for this type of project. With that in mind, I had been out on a business trip with my wife and a good friend of mine who we went to college together, but we also spent one whole summer in the Catskill Mountains. before he went back and got his engineering degree at UCLA because his family moved out there. And he showed me this thing with two chemicals mixed together perfectly. If you put it into a rubber mold, it can come out and compress it. It could come out looking like wood. I said, wow. So if I was to become the shareholder rather than the employee, the object was for us to get it started so it was right. And my brother-in-law Kip, we started a little plant on Long Island and put together. He was an engineer, and we got a contract with Bronx condominiums, okay, to make all of the cabinet doors for their bathrooms. Well, after the incident happened with Mobil Oil, I decided I had to get out of it. It just wasn't for me. So I called Elaine up. I was leaving Mobil Oil early. I just wanted to tell her if the realtor gets there before me, I called her and we were going to sell the house that we paid $30,000 for. We got 42,000 3 years later. So we had a little cash. At that time, it was more than a little to be able to make the move to California. And what we did was we moved into the valley, and I started a business with a group of people that put the money up, and we started in the van conversion business. One of the things that was lacking was a snack tray, as you can see behind me. Well, we became the largest supplier of snack trays through Sears Roebuck finally. And it was an amazing type of thing. And we'll go more into that as we get into the next segment of my career.